Settle in. This is Unintended Consequences, episode 37, for June 22nd, 2026. Monday, a fresh case to chew on as the week begins. In 2007, Indonesian officials approved new palm oil concessions across Central Kalimantan that would eventually cover more than 2 million hectares. Those approvals came with long planning horizons because the land had to be cleared, drained where necessary, and planted before any oil could flow. European refineries had already signed long term supply contracts for the crude palm oil those plantations would produce, because EU rules counted the resulting biodiesel as a low carbon fuel. The contracts locked in volumes years ahead of actual harvest, creating a guaranteed buyer for whatever came off the new ground. Within 5 years, satellite records showed that roughly one-third of the new plantings sat on land that had been primary forest only months earlier. The speed of that shift surprised observers who had assumed existing degraded land would absorb most of the expansion. The arithmetic here matters. If one-third of 2 million hectares moved from forest to plantation, that single wave alone represented on the order of 650,000 hectares of direct forest loss, tied to the policy-driven demand. In the mid-2000s, both the European Commission and the United States Congress faced rising oil prices and mounting evidence that transport sector carbon dioxide was still climbing. Officials looked for a drop-in substitute that could use existing engines and pipelines without requiring new vehicle fleets or refueling infrastructure. Biofuels made from crops appeared to offer a closed carbon cycle. Plants absorbed carbon dioxide while growing, then released it when burned. The 2005 U.S. Energy Policy Act and the 2009 EU Renewable Energy Directive therefore set binding volume targets. These included 36 billion gallons of renewable fuel in the United States by 2022 and 10% renewable energy in transport across the EU by 2020. At the time, life cycle models used by both governments treated land use change as a minor or zero factor, so the arithmetic showed large net savings. A model that assigns zero emissions to forest clearing will, by definition, report bigger reductions than one that adds those emissions back in. The U.S. Renewable Fuel Standard required refiners to blend increasing shares of corn ethanol and advanced biofuels, backed by tax credits of 51 cents per gallon. That credit reduced the effective cost of each gallon blended, which in turn encouraged refiners to meet the rising percentage mandates rather than pay penalties. In Europe, the Fuel Quality Directive and national blending mandates created similar demand for fatty acid methyl esters derived from vegetable oils. By 2010, U.S. corn acreage had risen by roughly 10 million acres compared with 2005 levels. Indonesia's palm oil output doubled between 2005 and 2012. Trade data from that period show that more than half of Europe's palm oil imports were ultimately routed to biodiesel plants in Rotterdam and Antwerp. Proponents cited falling tailpipe emissions in regulatory filings. Early government reports recorded compliance without yet measuring distant land conversion, because the models simply did not include a line item for peat drainage or forest clearing at the time. Life cycle studies published after 2008, beginning with Searchinger's science paper and followed by multiple EU-commissioned reviews, recalculated emissions once peat soil drainage and forest clearing were included. On tropical peatlands, the release of stored carbon turned a nominal 30 to 50% saving into a net increase that could exceed 100% relative to gasoline over a 30-year horizon. The key step in that recalculation is the oxidation of carbon that had been locked in peat for centuries. Once the water table drops, that carbon begins to leave the soil as carbon dioxide at rates that dwarf the annual uptake of the palm trees planted on top. In Indonesia and Malaysia, the area of industrial palm oil concessions expanded by an estimated 6 million hectares between 2000 and 2010. Roughly 20% of that expansion occurred on previously forested land, according to satellite analyses. The resulting smoke from peat fires in 2015 alone produced more carbon dioxide in a single season than Germany's annual industrial emissions. Corn ethanol expansion in the Midwest, meanwhile, displaced soybean acreage, which in turn encouraged additional soy planting in Brazil's Cerrado and Amazon margins. These indirect effects were not captured in the original regulatory models, so the very policies meant to reduce atmospheric carbon added measurable increments instead. By 2015, the EU had introduced an indirect land use change factor into its accounting rules and caped the contribution of food-based biofuels at 7% of transport energy. The United States Environmental Protection Agency adjusted its greenhouse gas thresholds for new biofuel pathways, effectively slowing approvals for additional corn ethanol capacity. Palm oil biodiesel lost its advanced status in some member states. Several large European buyers shifted contracts towards certified sustainable sources or waste oils. Even so, existing plantations continued to operate, and enforcement of zero deforestation commitments remained uneven. Current EU targets now emphasize waste-based and advanced fuels, yet legacy demand from earlier mandates still shapes global vegetable oil markets. Incentive structures that reward a single measured attribute, tailpipe carbon intensity, while leaving other variables unpriced will reliably shift pressure onto those variables. Complex ecological and economic systems respond through channels that are visible only after the policy is already locked in. When designing future climate or energy rules, therefore, it is worth asking which unmeasured margins the new incentive will enlarge and whether those margins can be monitored before the next planting season begins. That's the case for today. The lessons tend to travel further when you share them, so send this one to someone who'd find it useful and subscribe wherever you're listening. See you tomorrow. And before you go, this show is part of the NERA Network, a family of daily podcasts covering tech, science, markets, and more. If you enjoyed today's episode, give Models and Agents for Beginners a listen. Artificial intelligence explained simply for beginners and curious teens. You can explore the whole lineup at neuranetwork.com. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.